Greetings from Tokyo, I'm Trip, and welcome to the Hammer of Wrath. This week, you and I are going to build a full-size bolt pistol. Let's go. This video is sponsored by Tech. Thanks for joining me in the studio. I'm getting over my 4th or 5th head cold of the season, so bear with me. Today we're going to do something special. Now, I've been resin printing 3D bits for my miniatures for years, but in this week's video we're going to create our first ever full-scale prop replica using an FDM printer provided by Tech. But first, I want to talk about the strange little things about living in Japan. Now, if you grew up in the Western world, you might be accustomed to the fact that you can go to the grocery store or bakery and buy a loaf of bread. And in that loaf of bread, there will be 12 slices. But in Japan, that's not the case. When you go to the grocery store to purchase a loaf of sandwich bread, you will find it in packs of 4, 6, or 8. And it never includes the heels or the ends of the loaf. Now, why bread is only 4, 6, or 8 slices, I can't tell you. It makes no sense to me. Now, the other small, strange thing that happens in the grocery store is when you go to buy eggs. In the Western world, it's absolutely accepted that when you go to purchase eggs, you're going to get a dozen eggs. But as I mentioned, the dozen isn't a thing in Japan. It's an entirely Western unit of measurement or grouping. So when you go to purchase eggs here, you get them 10 to a pack. But the strangeness at the supermarket doesn't stop there. Pasta sauce is not sold in jars, it is sold in small plastic pouches, of which you would need 3 or 4 to equal what comes in 1 jar of pasta sauce in the States. Cereal as well is not sold in boxes with bags inside, but is just sold in a bag. Having grown up and lived most of my adult life in the West, all of these little cultural differences sort of snowball into this weird alternate universe vibe when you go to someplace like the grocery store and things are just a little bit off from what you know. It can be a disconcerting feeling. Well, that's enough about the small differences in everyday life that can make you question your reality. Let's talk about today's project, and that is a full-size Absolver bolt pistol replica printed on a brand new Tech Plus 4 FDM printer. I reached out to Tech and showed them my channel, and they were more than generous enough to start a partnership program with me and sent over their latest top-of-the-line printer, the Plus 4. So of course, now that I have access to something that can print on a large print bed and in real plastic, of course we're going to make a full-scale prop replica from the Warhammer universe. I'm really excited to share with you something that has been in the works for months now, so let me show you how I printed and painted a full-size Absolver bolt pistol replica. The sponsor of this week's video, Tech, sent over their latest in their line of FDM printers, the Plus 4. Now, this is the unit I was most interested in because it comes in a full enclosure. So, of course, that makes the unit considerably larger, but it helps reduce the sound while the printer is running and also allows for a heated chamber, which is essential for certain types of plastics. The printer is very easy to set up, and when you open the first accessory box, there is this quick start guide that shows you how to attach the handle to the front door and how to attach the LCD controller screen to the front of the printer. And now once you've got this hooked up and powered on, the display screen actually shows you the remaining steps you need to do in order to prepare the printer, like clip away these zip ties and release the screws and plates that hold down the print bed for transit. The spool holder attaches easily to the back of the printer, and there is a glass cover that goes on the top. This is for all you unboxing junkies that like a good cling pull. Ah, yeah, that's the stuff. Once the cover is in place, we can go ahead and load in our plastic. In this case, because I know what I'm going to be printing, I'm going to load an ABS plastic, which uses the heated chamber. The most important innovation on the Plus 4 is the drive belt. This is the first fully enclosed printer in the industry to use a 9mm drive belt, which further optimizes the surface quality of all the models that you print. Now, for my first test print, of course, I printed a Benchy. This is the benchmarking tool, and it is included on the USB drive that comes with the printer. But for my first real print, I wanted to try something a little more ambitious, and while I was trolling cults, I found this Absolver bolt pistol. It's just the right level for a beginner like me. It comes in a few simple pieces and should be easy enough to print. So I brought the files into KeyD Studio, which is their proprietary slicer based off the Prusa engine, I believe. It has this great feature where you can sort of snap to when you're rotating items and scaling them. Now here, we're going to go ahead and put in some supports. We're going to use tree supports and let the software automatically generate those. We slice the file, and as you can see here, we've got the tree supports on the underside. This is great because when we pull that away and it tears up that surface, that'll be hidden the way it attaches to the blaster. So I went ahead and printed all the parts out on the bed at 0.2 millimeter layer height. The walls are really smooth. The supports come away cleanly. Now, in some cases, of course, in the hard to reach spots, we had to use tools to get those out. Like here along the guideline, I had to use an old sculpting tool to get those out. Now, the bottom of the print was a little rough, but I planned it that way because I know that most of that is going to be hidden under the cover. So I've indicated where I need to smooth it out, and I bought this 2-part epoxy putty from the dollar store, and my God, did it stink. The stuff smelled like hair chemicals. You know, that ammonia smell when someone's bleaching or dyeing their hair or getting a perm. I used it once here and then just threw the rest out. Now, the Plus 4 has done an incredible job here, and we've printed at a 0.2 layer height, which would be fine for most practical purposes if you're creating like a replacement part. But because this is a display piece, we are going to do a little post-processing. So here I'm taking some heavy grit sandpaper. This is a 60 grit followed by 100 grit and sanding the surface, and I managed to crack the shell while I was doing it. I was pressing a little too hard. So I went back to the dollar store and got a 2-part epoxy glue. This is going to be stronger than a super glue, and wouldn't you know it, this stuff smelled awful as well. This is my first time using any kind of epoxy. Somebody in the comments, please tell me that not all epoxies smell like a portal to hell has opened up in your room. So we use that to fix the break, it worked the charm, and then we'll use the rest of it to put together some sub-assemblies like attaching the barrel to the front of the blaster here, as well as the optic that goes along the bottom. The last part we need to epoxy on as part of this sub-assembly is the trigger guard and trigger. It slides right through this guide, and a little bit comes out on the side. I've used a little too much here, but that's fine. We'll use our spatula to scrape that clean. And once that's dry, we're going to prime everything with Mr. Surface Gray 500. This is a filler primer that you can find in Japan, but anywhere else, just use an automotive filler primer. You might have noticed that I did not sand the handle and the front grip, and that's for a good reason, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We're going to use that filler primer here to fill in some more of those layer lines on the cover as well as the receiver. Just make sure we get an even coat, and once that dries, you can see here it's done a lot of work to sort of fill in those gaps. There are some places where we need to use a filler putty to get the additional print layers hidden, like on the underside here. I'll put in some Tamiya modeling putty there, and then just sort of trowel it in with a playing card. That's going to get us where we need to be. Now, I do like to wet sand whenever I can. It reduces the dust, keeps all that stuff from getting into your lungs, so we'll spray this sort of really generously with some water and use some 400 and 600 grit sandpaper to sand down that filler primer and smooth our surface. You can see big world of difference here. You can still see some of the layer lines, but that's just sort of visual. Once the next layer of primer goes on, it'll be completely covered. And in this case, I'm going to use Tamiya Surface Primer. Once that's dry, I'm going to go ahead and use Tamiya Metallic on the receiver here. Just make sure we get an even coat. And then on the cover, we're going to use Tamiya Bright Red. Now, why didn't I rough sand the grip? It's because I found this. It's a spray that puts a texture on as you spray it. So knowing that this would cover the very minor layer lines that were in the prints, I just went ahead and used this, and it turned out great. I could not have asked for better results here, and as you can see, it has that perfect texture that you would expect on a grip. I went ahead and masked off the front of the receiver and sprayed that with a black matte finish because you'll see that under the foregrip. And it was time for final assembly. We put the cover on through the guides and it closes with a satisfying snap. Next, we'll use a little bit more of that epoxy glue to attach the grip to the back of the receiver. We're going to use an epoxy here instead of a super glue because that's going to give us a much less brittle bond than super glue would. But on some of these smaller parts like the foregrip, I am going to use a super glue gel type. The reason I use the gel type is that it has a longer curing time, and if a little squeezes out on the side, we can always use a paper towel to clean it up here before it sets. Now, some of the smaller, finer detail pieces we have printed in resin, so we'll go ahead and pull those off the printer, cure them, and then start painting them. Here on the decorations for the side, we'll lay down a brown, and then over top of that, a gold. I love spray painting gold metallics. It's so rewarding. The model also came with these really massive bolter rounds, so I went ahead and printed up 4 of those and painted a copper on top of them, and then dry brushed a gold on top of that to give it some visual interest. I masked off the bottom and we painted our metallics along the top. Later, when we're weathering the entire blaster, we'll go ahead and add some of that oil wash to the bolter rounds as well so that they don't look brand new. I also printed the pommel to the grip in resin, so I went ahead and primed that and applied a silver metallic, and then using some super glue attached that to the bottom of the pistol grip. Now for the decorations that go on the side, there are no guide marks, so I just sort of had to eyeball it. It was a little nerve-wracking, but fortunately we were able to get it in a really great spot, and it was time to move on to weathering. Here I'm just using Agrax Earthshade straight out of the pot through the airbrush, and I'm going to apply that in all the recesses and shadow areas where grime might build up, along the tracks here, underneath all the buttons, and in this case underneath the decorations to sort of help separate them from the casing. Now on the barrel, we want to go ahead and add a heat effect, so I've applied a sepia tone here, and then we're going to apply some warmer and warmer tones, ending with a very subtle purple along the edge to mimic that heat effect. One of my favorite things to do when I'm making models, and I got to do it on a large scale here, is to add damage and weathering and chipping. Here I'm just using a middle value gray and just using an old brush to sort of drag it along any high point on the shell that would take sort of scraping damage in combat. Now, one of the final touches is weathering and washing the entire thing. I've mixed up a combination of umber and black here with a lot of water, and we just spread that around really generously on the surface and let it dry for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then we'll go through with a paper towel and gently dab off the excess on the high spots. What that does is leave the wash in the recesses, gives it an aged and worn feel that makes it a bit more realistic. And as a final step, we'll paint in some of these indicators that are on the side of the blaster. Now that we've spent dozens of hours printing and painting a showpiece, we can't just have it lay on the table, so I came up with the idea for this display stand that would hold the pistol as well as the bolter rounds. So I went into my 3D application, modeled up something very simple. We don't want the display to distract from the actual piece. Sent that to the printer and printed it out. Now in this case, I printed it in PLA, not ABS, and it was a lot harder to surface finish. I did use a 60 and 100 grit paper to knock down the big tooth of the top layer lines, but I had to fill everything in with Tamiya putty, sand that down, and the tolerances on the pieces were so excellent that I didn't even have to use glue here. I was just able to fit the stands in with a tight friction fit. I went ahead and resin printed a plaque to go on that as well, and did an antiquing treatment to make it look like aged bronze, and our stand came together nicely. And there you have it, what is sure to be the first of many prop replica videos on the channel. Now that I've gotten a taste of full-scale FDM printing, there's no going back. Of course, we will continue to paint miniatures as we always do, but this partnership with Kitty Tech has opened up an entirely new world for me, and I am excited to see what else we can create. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. It was my genuine pleasure to make and share it with you. If you'd like to support the channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. Help drive us to the front page of YouTube and grow our audience. Or you can always join our Patreon, linked in the description below. Now remember, joining our Patreon at any level grants you access to our private Discord server where like-minded hobbyists help each other out every day with honest and kind feedback. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.